Number 1.
Jennifer Hammond, nicknamed Moonbeam by her friends, vanished at the age of 18 on August 1, 2003. Prior to her disappearance, Jennifer had a job selling magazines, and she lived with her co-workers at a hotel in Albany, New York. On the day she vanished, Jennifer's co-workers dropped her off at the Creek and Pines mobile home park in Milton so she could sell magazine subscriptions door to door. When Jennifer's co-workers returned to the mobile home park later to pick her up, she was nowhere to be found. She never returned to the hotel in Albany and was never seen or heard from again. Nearly 2 years later, another young woman disappeared from the Milton area. On June 30, 2005, 19-year-old Christina White seemingly vanished without a trace. She was last seen by her mother at the home they shared at the Stockade Mobile Home Park. The Stockade Mobile community is located less than 2 miles from Creek and Pines, where Jennifer was last seen in 2003. 9 months later, on March 10, 2006, Christina's remains were found in the Daketown Forest in Greenfield. Forensics revealed that Christina had been stabbed multiple times. Due to the state of her body, it was believed that she had been killed shortly after her disappearance. Christina's death was officially classified as a homicide and detectives continued to investigate it as such, however they had very few leads to chase. Meanwhile, Jennifer Hammond remained missing. Then, on October 26, 2009, a hunter found a human skull on Lake Desolation Forest in Greenfield. The location where the skull was found is a little over 3 miles from the location where Christina's remains were found. Forensic testing and dental records confirmed that the skull belonged to Jennifer Hammond, who had vanished 6 years earlier in 2003. Her death was classified as a homicide. Investigators found it quite suspicious that 2 young women around the same age had vanished from the same area and had been found murdered in close proximity. From that point forward, detectives have announced that they believe Jennifer and Christina were killed by the same persons. Unfortunately, both murders remain unsolved today. Investigators are hoping to find a break in the cases. If you have any information that could help the investigation, please contact the Saratoga Springs Police Department at 518-584-1800.
Number 2.
On September 30, 2004, police in Tulsa, Oklahoma, were called to the apartment of an 18-year-old college student. Brittany Phillips had not been showing up for class, and her absence had become noted by both friends and family. Inside her apartment, police would discover what had happened to Brittany, but in more than a decade, have yet to figure out who was responsible. In the summer of 2004, an 18-year-old moved back to Tulsa, Oklahoma. She had actually grown up in Tulsa and gone to high school there, but had moved away the year prior to attend college. Having become homesick, the following spring she made the decision to move back to Oklahoma and attend school there in order to be closer to her friends and family. It was a decision that her friends and family welcomed at the time, as it meant that she would be a constant presence in their lives once again. Unfortunately, it was this decision to move back home which put this young woman in the sights of a killer. Close to 15 years after her violent death, her loved ones, primarily her mother, continued to fight for justice, as her killer has never been identified, and her case remains as unsolved today as it was back in the fall of 2004. Brittany Ivana Sarah Phillips was born on October 4, 1985, in St. Petersburg, Florida. As you'll soon hear, she was the second child of her mother, Dr. Maggie Zingman, following her brother, who was just 1 year older than her. Brittany's father was not really an active presence in her life outside of her early childhood, which is when her parents divorced. Both Brittany and her brother, Josh, would be raised by their mother, Maggie, who first moved them from Florida to Kentucky for a very brief period of time. Then, in 1991, this small family moved out to Oklahoma, which would prove to be their permanent home. Brittany and her brother, Josh, were close. Although, as Maggie would explain, the two had a contentious sibling rivalry, which, I guess, can be expected for any set of siblings so close in age. After all, he was only 15 months older than her, so the two were just a grade or so apart for the entirety of their childhoods. In her childhood, Brittany began to express an interest in acting and modeling. Even though she was unnaturally short for her age, a defect she constantly blamed on her mother's genetics, she quickly became a natural when it came to posing for the camera. Brittany's intelligence began to earn her accolades at school, especially as she progressed through Union High School in Tulsa. It eventually earned her a full-ride scholarship to her mother's alma mater, Eckerd College, in St. Petersburg, Florida, but according to Maggie, Brittany never considered herself that bright. She always seemed to credit the grades on her good study habits and instead tried to convince others that they were much smarter than she was. Despite being incredibly smart, beautiful, and accomplished, Brittany wasn't one of the cool kids in high school. In fact, it seemed to many of her classmates that Brittany didn't really seem to have many close friends. Rather, she was just friendly to everyone. A Reddit user named UALLIEKAT1282, who was a former classmate of Brittany, wrote about her. "While Brittany Phillips wasn't a close friend of mine, I did know her throughout high school, and she was a really nice girl. We all knew someone like her in high school, the type that you didn't know well, but who always knew who you were and would acknowledge you in the halls." This reputation wasn't really known by Brittany's mom until years later, at which point, it was too late to ask Brittany about it. Brittany graduated from Union High School in May of 2003, at the age of 17. She was younger than many of her peers, but already well on her way to figuring out what she wanted to do with her life. Following the death of a grandmother due to cancer, Brittany had decided to dedicate her life to chemistry. In particular, she wanted to study cancer and, hopefully, help figure out a possible cure. Later that summer, in August of 2003, Brittany set off for St. Petersburg, Florida, to attend her mother's alma mater, Eckerd College. She had received a full-ride chemistry scholarship, but would only last a single year at the Florida-based institute. While away, she began to grow incredibly homesick, eventually decided to attend classes closer to home the following spring. In May of 2004, approaching the end of her freshman year of college, Brittany decided to pack up her belongings and move back to Tulsa, Oklahoma. As you heard, her mother was living about an hour away, in Chandler, where she worked as a counselor for a female correctional facility, but Brittany still had several friends and family members in the Tulsa area, including her brother, Josh, with whom she would become incredibly close with over the next couple of months. At the age of 18, Brittany Phillips already had 1 year of college under her belt. Now, as the summer of 2003 came to a close, she was living in a quiet apartment complex named Glen Eagles Apartments, now known as Somerset Park at Union Apartments. This was a quiet area of town not known for any violent crime, which was quite literally just a stone's throw away from her high school, Union High. Here, she lived in a second-story apartment all by herself, which was a big step for an 18-year-old. Brittany began taking classes at Tulsa Community College, where she had several friends. She was still planning to enter the medical field and focus on cancer research, but had decided to earn her associate's degree before making any more major life decisions. That September, Brittany began settling into her routine of attending class, oftentimes driving with her friends to and from school. However, on Monday, September 27, 2004, Brittany contacted her mom and told her that she was starting to suffer from seasonal allergies. She had tried scheduling a doctor's appointment but had some issues doing so. So that evening, at around 9 p.m., Brittany called her mom and asked for some help. Over the phone, Maggie told her daughter that she would schedule her an appointment for that Friday and would get everything figured out. Brittany said that she was getting ready to drop off a friend of hers, a classmate that lived about 2 miles away from her apartment, along E51st Street and S Memorial Drive, then head back home and go to bed. That night, the final words spoken by both mother and daughter were "I love you." Over the next few days, Brittany Phillips was a no-show for any of her classes, an absence that was quickly noticed by her friends, who began to grow concerned. During that same span of time, Maggie, Brittany's mother, who lived an hour away, was unable to get in touch with her. She left numerous voicemails on Brittany's answering machine, but did not hear back. In the early morning hours of Friday, October 1, 2004, Dr. Maggie Zingman responded to a knock at her front door. As she recalls, it was almost like a scene out of a movie, with rain pouring outside of her house in Chandler, Oklahoma. When she opened up the door, she saw a young sheriff's deputy standing there, who promptly asked her for her name and then gave her the news that no parent should ever have to hear. According to Maggie, he told her, "You need to call Tulsa police. Your daughter's been murdered." In those early morning hours, Dr. Maggie Zingman would learn that her daughter, 18-year-old Brittany Phillips, had been found in her apartment, having been raped and murdered. Her body had apparently been laying in her apartment for several days, having only been discovered after a wellness check was called in by some worried friends of Brittany's. Maggie immediately set off for Brittany's apartment in Tulsa, which was about an hour away. By the time she got there, Brittany's body had already been taken away from the scene by the medical examiner, and she would, unfortunately, never get the chance to see her daughter again. Brittany's funeral was held just a few days after the discovery of her body, on October 4, 2004, which, coincidentally, would have also been her 19th birthday. A funeral procession would lead to the Rose Hill Memorial Park in Tulsa, where Brittany's body would be interred. Through the entire proceeding, Brittany was remembered by her friends, family members, and other loved ones, who all recalled her as the smart, funny, beautiful, intelligent, and kind soul they had come to know. However, through the entire proceeding, all that Brittany's mother could think about was what her daughter's final moments had been like. Over the next several years, she would wrestle with the unsettling fact that her daughter had been killed just hours after she had last spoken to her. The body of Brittany Phillips had been discovered just hours prior to her loved ones learning about her death, on the evening of Thursday, September 30, 2004. A worried friend had tried to check in on Brittany earlier that evening, after not seeing her in class or hearing from her for several days. This friend had then called police and asked them to perform a wellness check on her. At around 9 p.m. that Thursday, police had entered Brittany's second-story apartment along 65th Street. Inside of her apartment bedroom, police found her body lying on the floor next to her bed, in the opposite direction of how her pillows and blankets were aligned. There appeared to have been an altercation before her death, with her apartment appearing to have been ransacked, although there has been no information on what, if anything, had been stolen. Investigators believe that Brittany had fought back against her attacker due to details about her remains that have not been released to the public. However, in conversations with her mother, I learned that police found proof of Brittany having been pushed up against a wall across the room from where her body was eventually found, implying that a struggle had undoubtedly taken place. It appeared that, prior to her death, Brittany had been raped. The cause of death was later determined to be strangulation, but it was unknown if her killer had used an object to do so, or if he had simply used his strength and body weight to strangle her. Brittany's remains were identified by police at the crime scene, who compared her remains to pictures from a driver's license recovered at the scene. Within a few hours of the discovery, Brittany's remains had been sent off to the medical examiner for an autopsy, and that, in addition to the several days of decomposition, meant that Brittany's loved ones were never able to see her body, not even during the funeral or memorial service. DNA was discovered at the crime scene, which is believed to be that of the culprit. This DNA was found in 2 separate samples, which came from the same individual, who did not appear to be anyone previously associated with Brittany. Due to technological limits at the time, there was only so much that police could do after submitting the DNA to local and national databases, where it ultimately failed to match up with any known records. Not much would be written about this DNA for the first decade or so of this case, but in recent years, that DNA sample has come up quite a bit, so I'll go into some more detail about that later in this episode. Out of all of the details that investigators would grapple with in this case, the most perplexing one was how Brittany's killer had gotten into her apartment. After all, she did live on the second floor, meaning that the access points were rather limited, but as police learned more about the crime scene, they continued to create more questions for themselves. The doors into Brittany's apartment showed no sign of forced entry, neither the front door nor the back door, which led to a private second-story balcony. This implied that neither door had served as an entrance for the killer, but police did not rule them out. It was possible, however unlikely, that either door had been left unlocked And the killer might have contorted or climbed onto the back porch. Then, there were the windows to the apartment. Like the doors, there was no sign of forced entry, no clues that any of the windows had been forced open. However, investigators would discover that at least one window had had its screen removed, which provided investigators with a possible answer. Like the back porch, this would have been quite the physical feat, but wasn't impossible. However, police would later state that the removal of the window's screen might have been a tactic meant to stage a crime scene, so it doesn't seem like a theory that they are comfortable with. Perhaps the most realistic and terrifying option was the possibility that Brittany's killer had accessed her apartment through the attic, which she shared with 7 other apartments. All 8 apartments in her building shared an attic space, which had access points in each closet. Feasibly, this meant that anybody from these apartments had access to the neighboring units through this shared attic space. It is not known if this is how the culprit had gained access to Brittany's apartment, but police believe there is a strong possibility that it was. A detective that stood 6 foot 3 inches tall was easily able to fit through the opening in Brittany's closet, meaning that a man of good stature would have been able to do so for any of the apartments in Brittany's building. As someone who's lived in an apartment complex with a shared attic, I can't even imagine how terrifying that might be, and I encourage all of you that live in a similar unit to contact your landlords to get a lock or simply do so yourself. Over the years, police have speculated that Brittany Phillips' killer had gained entry to her apartment before she got home on the evening of Monday, September 27, 2004. It's possible that, after speaking to her mother and then dropping off her friend, she returned to her apartment and was immediately attacked. The exact time of the assault is unknown, with police later speculating that the attack happened sometime between 9 p.m. that night and 8 a.m. the following morning, September 28, 2004. Other than that, there is not much that is known about Brittany's death, at least, not until the discovery of her body roughly 3 days after she was killed. Tulsa police would later release a profile for this killer, which I have paraphrased into the following: A. He may be someone who is up and/or alone at night. B. He may have sexual problems, which he struggles to deal with on a regular basis. C. He may be into high-risk behaviors that are dangerous to himself or others, or may cause pain, such as painful sex acts. D. He may be someone with anger issues who constantly deals with issues of self-worth. E. He may or may not have been previously arrested for rape. However, if he was likely charged with crimes such as endangering or public indecency, crimes that won't put him on investigators' radar and/or won't force him to register as a sex offender. F. He may live outside of the Tulsa area. He also may or may not have traveled in September or October of 2004, and upon his return, starting acting different, anxious, angry, depressed, engaging in heavy drug alcohol abuse, etc. G. He may have been outgoing, but possibly became more withdrawn following the murder. H. He may have attempted to hurt or kill himself in the past. He may have succeeded in the years since. I. He may drive along I-35, I-44, or I-40 because of work, or traveled through the Tulsa region semi-regularly for other reasons. J. He may have had a public service job that gave him access to customer addresses, jobs such as utilities worker, cell phone provider, etc. This information gave police a foundation on which to base their search for the culprit, but it would prove unsuccessful in the weeks, months, and years after Brittany's murder. In the aftermath of this tragic incident, Dr. Maggie Zingman, Brittany's mother, struggled with a direction in which to take her life. Following her daughter's death, Maggie was left adrift without any kind of resolution and got tired of simply following an investigation that had quickly reached a dead end. At this point, Maggie decided to cover her vehicle in photos of Brittany, as well as images and information pertinent to the crime. This would later take the form of a suspect sketch created by the DNA profile, as well as phone numbers for a tip line and an associated website. Her car was painted bright purple and pink, giving it a design that has evolved over multiple incarnations. Maggie is now on her 3rd such vehicle, having racked up hundreds of thousands of miles by traveling the nation and speaking to news agencies, journalists, organizations, basically anyone that would listen. Maggie admits that this venture of hers has been daunting and draining. Not only on the soul, as she has to recount her darkest days, but on the wallet, as she has really drained her savings in this endeavor. However, despite this, she hopes to keep at it, if not to help solve Brittany's case, then to keep her story alive for as long as possible. In addition to spreading the word about Brittany's unsolved murder, Dr. Zingman has also been pushing for wholesale DNA reform, not only in Oklahoma, but throughout the nation. She has been encouraging lawmakers and police agencies to initiate DNA collection at the time of arrest, a law currently on the books in more than half of the nation, but not everywhere. With her drive, Maggie was able to successfully help pass a law in Oklahoma in 2016, but the state has been dragging its heels on allocating any funding for DNA collection in the years since. That just means that Maggie is going to keep at it, preaching her daughter's story and the potentials of DNA collection. In 2007, after more than 3 years of inactivity in this case, police decided to release some information about the crime scene in the hopes of inspiring some new leads. They announced that the light purple pillowcase had been found at the crime scene, which did not match any of Brittany's linens. Investigators believed it had been left behind by the culprit, who had brought it to the scene for some unknown reason, perhaps having brought it to abscond with some of Brittany's belongings, but forgetting about it at the scene. Detective Jeff Felton stated at the time, "We believe that the perpetrator may have brought the pillowcase with him and left it behind." Police had initially refrained from releasing this information, believing that it might encourage Brittany's killer to discard other similar linens. But now, roughly 3 years later, they no longer believed that this was a risk and wanted to know if anyone knew of someone that had similar linens but might have been missing a pillowcase or two. Several years would continue to pass, and in 2013, as the 10-year mark of the crime quickly approached, police announced that they were continuing to investigate the case. Despite it being handled by the Cold Case Unit, police were still continuing to receive tips from the public and were actively investigating the case.
Number 3.
Alexandra Anaya was a 13-year-old girl from Hammond, Indiana who went missing on August 13, 2005. Part of her remains were found on August 16, 2005, and although there was a suspect in custody, Alexandra's murder remains unsolved. Alexandra Anaya was born on November 4, 1992. She lived with her mother, Sandra Anaya, and her 2 younger twin sisters, Romy and Roxy, in Hammond, Indiana. Alexandra's mother described her as a beautiful child, kind and gentle who loved her twin sisters. Alexandra also loved animals, and her hope was to be a veterinarian when she grew up. Alexandra's hobbies included playing soccer and volleyball and riding horses, as well as volunteering at animal shelters, just a few of her many joys in life. On the morning August 13, 2005, Sandra left her house to run some errands only to come back and discover that Alexandra was not in her bedroom and could not be found in the house. Sandra knew this was out of the ordinary for several reasons. Alexandra didn't have a history of running away, and she was quite content and happy with her life at the moment. Sandra later called the Hammond, Indiana Police Department to report her daughter missing. 3 days later, on August 16, 2005, a 14-year-old boy was out riding a speedboat on the Calumet River in Chicago, Illinois with his parents when he spotted what he thought was a mannequin. As the family approached, the boy's parents realized it was not a mannequin but human remains. Authorities were then called in due to an investigation. Upon investigating, the only part of the remains that were found were the child's torso. The child's head, arms, and legs were missing and have never been recovered to this day. The remains had been weighed down with chains and straps, most likely to prevent the discovery. The child's cause of death could not be determined by autopsy, but the examiners ruled this death as clearly a homicide. Alexandra's mother, Sandra, was later called to the police station for more information regarding Alexandra's disappearance. Sandra began telling investigators that at the time of her disappearance Alexandra had a scar on her chin and she had a sprained ankle, unbeknownst to her that only a torso was found. A DNA test was taken, and a few weeks later, the results came in that the remains did belong to Alexandra, to which her mother broke down. Following the investigation, Alexandra's former stepdad and the father of her 2 younger sisters, Rodolfo Heredia, was being charged for stalking the family of Sandra after they had split up. He admitted to stalking and even making a key to enter Sandra's home, but he was later acquitted of his charges. Rodolfo was a prime suspect in Alexandra's murder because it was reported that he had been molesting Alexandra for years during the time he and her mother were involved, as well as the fact that he lived about 1.5 blocks from where Alexandra's remains were found. Sandra ended her long-term relationship with Rodolfo in the spring of 2005 upon learning from her daughter what he had done. It's been 15 years and there still haven't been any charges made for Alexandra's murder. It is believed that Alexandra knew her killer, and Sandra and the investigators believe they know who, but it's a matter of having enough evidence to charge the killer. Police Lieutenant Ron Johnson stated, "I never don't think about it. It's always on my mind when talking about Alexandra and the investigation." Although he has since retired, Johnson still follows her case. This case was so heartbreaking to learn and read about. It's even more heartbreaking knowing the circumstances and knowing that the person who committed such a horrid crime against an innocent and defenseless human hasn't been brought to justice. Sandra Anaya stated that she hopes the rest of her daughter's remains will eventually be found and her killer will pay for what they did. "What happened to Alexandra was inhumane and I hope whoever did this is revealed soon. Both Alexandra and her family deserve peace and justice." Chicago's FBI Homicide Initiative Task Force is investigating Alex's case. Anyone who may have information on the case is being asked to call the FBI Chicago field office at 312-421-6700.
Number 4.
The morning of December 11, 2005 was supposed to be a celebratory occasion for Chairo Garibay and her family members. That morning, the 20-year-old planned to meet her parents at St. Joseph's Church in Marysville, California, for the Mass of Our Lady, the Virgin of Guadalupe at 5 a.m. The church is an approximate 15 to 20-minute drive away from the family's home in Olivehurst. When Chairo did not show up as planned, her parents initially thought she was still sleeping. However, when they returned to their home around 9:30 a.m., they noticed that Chairo was not home and the family vehicle was missing. Oddly enough, though, Chairo's purse and identification were still inside the house. Unbeknownst to the Garibays, their family car had actually been discovered by police just a half an hour earlier. It was partly submerged in the Bear River. Chairo was not inside the car, nor was any sign of her found on the scene. Once police were able to speak to the Garibays about the vehicle, Chairo was reported missing. An initial look around the Garibay home did not reveal any obvious signs of forced entry. Then, when police took a look around the residence, they noticed that one of the windows in the back of the house was ajar and the screen was on the ground. Chairo's parents stated that they did not believe the window was in that condition prior to the morning of December 11. From that point forward, police began investigating a potential kidnapping in Chairo's case. Weeks passed without any sign of Chairo. Then, in January 2006, local residents found a body in an open field less than a mile away from Chairo's home. The body was wrapped in black tarp material, with broken pieces of cement wrapped inside. It did not take long for the body to be identified as that of Chairo Garibay. She had been murdered, and autopsy had determined that blunt force trauma was the cause of her death. Investigators have reportedly interviewed anybody who might have spoken to Chairo in the days leading up to her disappearance. Those closest to her, including her boyfriend and parents, have all been cleared of suspicion. Since then, leads in Chairo's case have been far and few in between. Chairo's murder remains unsolved. The Yuba County Sheriff's Office is investigating. If you have any information that could lead to her murderer, please contact the investigative unit at 530-749-7777.
Number 5.
15-year-old Kayla Reed was last seen at her family's home in Livermore, California on December 2, 2005. According to her mother Angel Sheets, Kayla was a habitual runaway, and on the evening of December 2, Kayla allegedly was last seen with a full face of makeup on before she told her mother she was going to sleep. Due to this, Angel suspected that Kayla was going to sneak out to meet her friends that night. The following morning, Angel called the police around 10:30 a.m. to report that Kayla was gone. Detectives showed up at Angel's home shortly after she called to report Kayla missing, but when they knocked on the door, Angel did not answer. She later stated that she fell asleep and did not hear the detectives knocking on the door. Angel waited 2 more days before contacting the police again on December 5, 2005. This time, she successfully filed a missing persons report for Kayla. However, Angel told detectives about her suspicions about Kayla sneaking out the night she vanished. Due to this, Kayla was classified as a runaway. Detectives initially focused on Kayla's Mitrust page in the early stages of the investigation, as it was theorized that Kayla might have met up with somebody she met on the site. That theory never panned out, as investigators could not find any evidence that Kayla was corresponding with somebody she did not know on Mitrust. Then, on January 10, 2006, the investigation took an unexpected turn. Kayla's body was found floating in the Delta Mendota Canal. An autopsy was unable to determine her cause of death, but it was reportedly clear that she had been murdered. Additionally, the autopsy revealed that Kayla had been dead for over a month by the time she was found, the same amount of time she had been missing. A year and a half after Kayla's body was found, investigators announced that Kayla's mother, Angel, was a person of interest in Kayla's murder. Angel's friend, Dennis Murphy, was also declared a person of interest. Throughout the investigation, detectives learned that Angel and Dennis were the last known people to have seen Kayla alive. Both Angel and Dennis also gave conflicting stories to detectives as well. Angel originally stated that she was the only other person in the house on the evening of December 2. Later, she admitted that Dennis had come over that night to do meth. Angel said that, before she went to bed that night, she asked Dennis to keep an eye on Kayla in case she tried to sneak out. When Angel woke up the next morning, she said that both Kayla and Dennis were gone. Dennis, on the other hand, admitted to going to Angel's house on the evening of December 2, but he told police that he left when Angel and Kayla began to argue. He said that he returned to Angel's house the following morning, and at that time, Kayla was gone, and Angel seemed upset. Despite their conflicting statements, neither Angel nor Dennis have been charged with anything related to Kayla's death. Many of Kayla's other family members believe that Angel knows exactly what happened to Kayla and that her lifestyle is likely what led to Kayla's death. The investigation into Kayla's case is still ongoing today. If you have any information that could lead to an arrest, please contact the Livermore Police Department at 925-371-4900.
Number 6.
Heather Radcliffe, 28, and her daughter Chairo Radcliffe, 6, were brutally murdered inside their own home during the early morning hours of December 9, 2006. Their murders remain unsolved to this day. Heather was raising Chairo in Gainesville, Florida. Many described Heather as friendly, hardworking, and straightforward. She worked at a tree trimming company and was the boss to a team of employees. Heather was also described as a loving and dedicated mother. In December 2006, she was looking forward to celebrating the Christmas holiday with Chairo. Unfortunately, before they could, their time got cut short. Police and the fire department were called to Heather's home around 6:30 a.m. on December 9 after a neighbor noticed that flames were erupting from the roof of the house. It was initially believed that the fire was caused by an electrical issue. Tragically, upon closer inspection, it became clear that this was not the case. After the fire was put out, authorities searched the house for any victims. Chairo was found first, near the living room just inches away from a phone. It appeared that the little girl had tried to call for help. Heather was found in her bedroom. Their dog was found in the office with the door closed. Investigators also noticed that the fire had 2 separate starting points. The first starting point was in Heather's bedroom, the ignition point being her mattress. The second starting point was in Chairo's bedroom. An autopsy confirmed that Heather had been shot 3 times, once in the chest and twice in the head. It's believed that Chairo was awoken by the gunfire and that the assailant attacked Chairo after she tried to use her mother's phone to call for help. It's also believed that the killer left their house and then returned shortly thereafter with gasoline to start the fires. Chairo died of a combination of both strangulation and smoke inhalation. Years have passed without any answers in their case. Investigators looked into Chairo's father, but he was cleared after his alibi was established. Investigators also looked into Heather's also ex-boyfriends and her male employees, but so far no arrests have been made. However, investigators have revealed that Heather and Chairo were likely killed by someone Heather knew and allowed into her house. Heather's loved ones revealed that she often put their dog in the office when she was expecting a visitor. Additionally, the front door was unlocked. Even knowing this information, a motive for Heather's murder remains unclear. This case is still open, and Heather and Chairo's loved ones are hoping to see justice someday. If you have any information that could lead to the killer, please call 352-372-7867 to submit an anonymous tip.
Number 7.
Jorden Sopher had just recently turned 18 years old when she vanished on May 23, 2006. The teen girl lived in Wabash, Indiana at the time of her disappearance. Jorden had spent most of her childhood in the foster system before she was adopted at age 16 by Robert and Linda Sopher. That same year, she dropped out of high school and later began working at a local Hardee's restaurant. However, during the spring of 2006, Jorden told her family members that she planned to re-enroll in high school so she could get a diploma. Before she had that opportunity, Jorden seemingly vanished without a trace. Months before her disappearance, Jorden moved out of her adoptive parents' home and had been staying with various relatives and friends in the Wabash area. She was staying with her friend and co-worker Erin Harlan the weekend before her disappearance. The two reportedly last saw each other around 5:15 a.m. on May 23, 2006, when Erin woke up to go to her morning shift at Hardee's. Jorden told Erin that she was not working until later that day, so she stayed behind as Erin left for work. At a later point that morning, Jorden was dropped off at her adoptive parents' house in a truck driven by Corey Brightenthal. According to Jordan's father Robert Sopher, she spoke briefly to him in the garage before leaving the house on foot. After walking away from the house, Jorden was never seen or heard from again. Later that evening, employees at Hardee's called the Sophers to inquire about Jordan's whereabouts, as she had not shown up to her scheduled shift. This was very out of character for Jorden, so her parents immediately began to worry. They reported her missing the following day. Once police began to investigate, they questioned both Erin and Corey. Erin told police that Jorden was not at her house when she returned from her shift at Hardee's at 10:15 that morning. However, all of Jordan's belongings, including her purse, were left behind. Corey told police that Jorden had accidentally left her cell phone in his car when he dropped her off at her parents' house that morning. He later reportedly gave the cell phone to Erin so she could return it to Jorden. The cell phone was later turned over to investigators, but unfortunately it did not yield any clues. Police also questioned both Linda and Robert Sopher. Linda agreed to take a polygraph exam, which she passed, but Robert refused to take one. Many found this suspicious, but both Linda and Robert maintain that Robert took one of their foster children to the doctor shortly after Jorden left their house that morning. Jordan's case quickly grew cold. Years passed without any clues or trace of her whereabouts. Then, in May 2009, nearly 3 years after Jordan's disappearance, the case had a break. A mushroom hunter at a creek in Peru, Indiana had spotted human remains amongst a thick canopy of raspberry bushes and honeysuckle. Dental records later confirmed that those remains belonged to Jorden Sopher. Due to the deterioration of the remains, an autopsy was unable to determine a cause of death, but police still began to investigate Jordan's death as a homicide. It is believed that Jordan's body was in the spot where it was found ever since her disappearance. The clothes she was wearing that day were found amongst the remains. Years have passed since the discovery of Jordan's body, yet her murder remains unsolved. There has been very little information available about the investigation, especially in more recent years. Still, anyone with information that could lead to Jordan's case being solved is encouraged to call 1-877-226-1026 to submit an anonymous tip.